The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
So we're here with Amy Roma, a partner at the law firm Hogan Lovells and a star in the field of nuclear law. I've been wanting to understand the industry a little bit better from the legal perspective, so I'm really happy that we had this chance to meet up today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, so I want to go all the way back to the beginning and see how you even became interested in the nuclear law space to begin with. I know that you went to both undergrad and law school up in the Northeast. Were you from there originally?
Yep, I grew up in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and then went to college in New Hampshire and law school in Boston.
And then what happened after that?
So after that, I had worked at a law firm as a summer associate when I was up in Massachusetts, and I saw the world as being a corporate attorney or a litigator, and both of those paths seemed really boring to me, and I wasn't finding anything that I found particularly compelling. And so I decided to roll the dice and give working for the government a try. Yeah. And so I ended up just randomly doing an interview with Steve Burns from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, who was up in Boston doing legal recruiting for the NRC's Office of General Counsel. And, it was a 20-minute interview, but I'm like, if there's someone out there who's so passionate about their job and really loves what they're doing, and he doesn't have a technical background, maybe I should try the NRC.
Wow.
And so I ended up going to the NRC. I worked for the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board, which is the internal court at the agency. So I didn't go work at the Office of General Counsel, but
the internal court, what are they? What's their purview?
So the Atomic Energy Act, which is provides the NRC with the jurisdiction over a lot of the activities that it does, including licensing.
And this goes all the way back to the 1960s.
Yeah, exactly. So the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board is the internal court. So if there's a challenge, like a hearing request for an NRC license application, a license amendment, the public has the opportunity to request a hearing, and the court that would hear that is usually the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board.
Wow. And so what were some of the things that you encountered while you were there?
So I worked on the private fuel storage case, which is, I never realized how interesting it would be, because now the hot topic everybody's talking about is where to store nuclear waste,
right,
and how to find a consolidated interim storage facility until a permanent disposal facility is up and running, which isn't even on the horizon right now. And so having consolidated interim storage is much more important.
Because there was an effort to have the long-term storage set up that I guess fell through, and then now everyone's just scrambling to find interim storage.
Well, so it was Yucca Mountain,
yes,
and that's it's been plagued by politics, as you would say.
Yeah.
And so every time there's kind of a change in administration or a change in a senator or a congressman, the winds change on whether people support their project or they don't, whether it's going to get funded or whether it's not. And so it's just not going anywhere at this point. So it becomes more and more important to figure out what to do. If we're not going to come up with a permanent solution, coming up with an interim solution is becoming more and more important as we see nuclear power plants shutting down and nuclear waste is left on site on a storage pad. It's perfectly safe, but it's not an efficient way to kind of maintain control over that material. Having a consolidated spot in the country makes sense, and PFS was the first of a kind. PFS, private fuel storage.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to make you explain
all acronyms.
Make
me spell everything out, right? And so private fuel storage was the name of the company that applied for the first consolidated interim storage facility, so away from a reactor. And they were licensed by the NRC. That facility was never built for a number of different reasons.
Okay.
But now we have two applications for two similar type facilities. And I remember, about 6 years ago, it was 6 years ago because I was pregnant with my son at the time, and I was like 7 months pregnant, and I spoke on a on a panel on nuclear waste at a conference out in Phoenix. And I remember the Blue Ribbon Commission had just come out with their recommendations for like a long-term solution, near-term and long-term recommendations for how to handle nuclear waste. And
was John Kotek on that Blue Ribbon Commission?
He was, yeah, okay. Exactly. And so, but the Blue Ribbon Commission came out and made recommendations, and it's kind of one of several Blue Ribbon Commissions who have made recommendations. Okay. So this was just kind of the latest version. And I got up, and I was 7 months pregnant, and I said, in about 30 years from now, my son can come up here and tell you about the latest Blue Ribbon Commission findings again on what to do with nuclear waste. And, hopefully we'll have made more leeway since then, but so far not too much progress.
Right. And then so that was while you were at the NRC?
No, I was not at the NRC at that time. I was in private practice.
You were in private practice at that time. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then how
I worked on private fuel storage when I was at the NRC. And so that was probably one of the most noteworthy cases. I did a 2-year clerkship, and I spent an entire year of my clerkship on that licensing.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what next?
So then it's only a 2-year clerkship. So at the end of 2 years, I went into private practice. I started off at another law firm, which you would think being a nuclear lawyer is already specialized enough, right. But they did only NRC licensing actions, so it was just cases before the licensing board.
And now your purview extends to everything from that to exports,
exactly.
To investor due diligence.
I realized I like nuclear as an industry. I want to learn about all the legal issues facing this industry. Yeah. And so I came to the firm that I'm at now, and I do nuclear export control, nuclear investment, nuclear due diligence. I do decommissioning, bankruptcy,
liability,
everything that kind of touches the nuclear field. I've worked on usually in some capacity or another, here or abroad.
So I'd love to touch on a few of those topics and maybe help people understand what some of the considerations are and the complexities of those areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe we can start with hopefully one of the more simpler ones, the nuclear liability. And work
I love how you think that's the simple one. Well, sure. I appreciate your optimism.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, the Price Anderson Act.
Yep.
Okay, so at least there's some law in place that, okay.
Okay, so the Price-Anderson Act it covers nuclear liability. So in the event of a radiological incident at like a nuclear power plant, it provides a whole network of federal laws that apply under Price-Anderson. So it provides liability caps, it provides quick compensation to somebody who's been injured, personally injured, or their property has been damaged by a radiological release. It channels the liability, it economically channels it to the nuclear operator through the insurance program that they maintain. So they have a nuclear insurance policy, and so if you're a supplier that supplies equipment to a nuclear power plant, for example, and there's an incident at that facility, then you're not on the hook if there's for third parties for their damages in the event of an accident. And there's similar laws in place around the world. So there's 2 international nuclear liability conventions that really control this: the Vienna Convention on Nuclear Liability and the Paris Convention. You don't need to remember those names. They just have the same principles, which is put a liability cap program in place, channel liability to the operator, set up a financial compensation, usually through an insurance program, and ensure quick compensation to a victim in the event of an incident.
Is this the way that it's the nuclear regulatory regime worldwide has typically formed? The U.S. will come up with something, and then there'll be international standards that mirror it?
Pretty much so. It's not always the case, but we were we developed a commercial nuclear power program first, and we developed a pretty robust program. We have, about, give or take, 100 operating nuclear power plants, and we have a regulator with about 3,000 people that oversee those plants. We put in place the nuclear liability law very early on, and that became the basis for the international laws that were developed. They're slightly different, but it's the same fundamental principles. And the reason you put those laws in place are the potential exposure in the event of an incident. People,
would make it cost prohibitive to build in the first place?
Yes, the risk was too high, and or the perceived risk was too high, so people didn't want to enter in those fields in the first place.
I see.
And to remove that barrier, they put this law in place.
That's right. But these laws have never been exercised in the U.S. I mean, we haven't had a have we had a disaster that's called for any liability caps in the U.S.?
Well, so there's been 3 Mile Island, and so the nuclear insurer in that case made payments under their third-party and nuclear liability insurance policies for 3 Mile Island, but it was not for, there was no radiological damages. There was no.
It was just equipment damage.
It was just, right, and but those when you think about the nuclear liability law, this is for off-site damages. So when you're thinking about Price-Anderson, that's off-site damages.
Yes.
That's past the site boundary. Was there any third party who received radiological damages,
That they'd have
injury
claims
to their right? So that's a physical harm to your body or physical harm to your property. That's actually really hard to establish, particularly in the types of incidents that we have seen, like in the United States. But the insurer has paid out under those policies, usually in part of settlement agreements. And so that's happened, but it hasn't been a huge amount.
Got it. Some of the other topics that you cover, there are a few that maybe go hand in hand. But when we think a lot about advanced reactors coming forth, there's so many different legal facets to this, right? I mean, there's the working directly with the NRC, but then there's also when you start designing the reactor to begin with, I mean, what's the market that you design for, and what are some of the considerations there? Could you walk us through a little bit of that?
Sure. So that one's pretty complex, and I think for people who are new to the nuclear industry, which a lot of these emerging companies are, there's a bit of a learning curve.
Yeah.
And so I remember, back when small modular reactors, advanced reactors started kind of emerging, we had our first client in around 2006 timeframe, so about 12 years ago. And the discussions were very much like, I eventually need to obtain an NRC license for this, but we don't need lawyers for a while. But right off the bat, they were engaging in discussions with foreign countries about deploying their technology abroad.
And even when you engage in discussions, are there intellectual property export considerations there?
It's the nuclear export control regime you need to be mindful of. And so
wow. And so where is that line when you're just talking to someone versus...
Well, there's a very clear definition of what can or cannot be provided in DOE's 10 CFR Part 810 regulations.
Part 810. We're going to come back to that later.
Right? So Part 810 regulations will set forth but the general rule is if it's publicly available information, if it's just marketing material, you can go ahead and export it. But if you're going to sign a non-disclosure agreement, for example, and start to share technical information, then you're starting to move into the Part 810 space. And what's particularly important under Part 810 is it can either be easy or not easy. If it's generally authorized, so you're engaging in discussions with a customer in the UK, and it's about an advanced reactor technology, you can share Part 810 controlled nuclear export controlled information with them and just file a report to DOE within 30 days of sharing that information.
Now, when you said generally authorized, that's what I picked up on as the key words there.
That's a key word.
And is that associated with what people call the 1-2-3 agreement?
So they're different. So let's back it up here.
Yeah.
All right. Right off the bat, I'm a U.S. reactor designer. I want to sell technology abroad. I'm engaging in discussions. What's the first things I need to be thinking about if I want to deploy this technology abroad? The very first thing you need to ask yourself is, do we have a 123 agreement in place with them? It's named 123 after Section 123 of the Atomic Energy Act. That's a bilateral agreement for nuclear cooperation. It is the essential foundation for engaging in meaningful nuclear trade with a company.
And there are a few dozen countries that we share that with?
Yeah, I think there's maybe about 26, 123, give or take a few 123 agreements, including Euratom, which includes a whole bunch of, basically all the European countries. And so why that's important? Two things. First, in order to sell nuclear equipment, complete reactors, nuclear material to the other country, that 123 agreement needs to be in place. It does not necessarily need to be in place in order to share technical information abroad. So that is why you look to, is it generally authorized or specific authorized? When you look at that Part 810, the Secretary of the Energy has the ability to authorize the export of nuclear technology or authorize the export of U.S. nuclear assistance, or a U.S. person going to a foreign country to assist with their nuclear program.
And does it have to go up to the Secretary of Energy?
Signed out by the Secretary of Energy.
Even for something like just a personnel consideration?
If it's not a generally authorized...
Wow.
Or if it's not a generally authorized destination, or if it's not a generally authorized activity. So what are you trying to export? If you're trying to export nuclear enrichment technology, that's generally authorized no matter where it's going. So the Secretary of Energy would, if you're exporting, Centrus wants to export its enrichment technology abroad, that's got to be specifically authorized by the Secretary of Energy. If a U.S. person wants to go help the U.K. with its nuclear program or to export technology, regular light water reactor technology to the U.K., generally authorized, you just have to provide a notice within 30 days. But a lot of the countries that are looking at advanced reactors, UK is looking at advanced reactors, but a lot of the other countries looking at advanced reactors are countries that don't have the infrastructure to support large-scale nuclear. They have remote communities. They have large areas of the population that don't have reliable energy, and we don't have 123 agreements.
And that's because these are the developing countries that weren't involved in these types of international discussions when the 123s were initially put in place.
Exactly. And so most of Africa, a lot of the countries in the Middle East that are looking at developing nuclear, those countries with very limited, except unless it's a generally authorized destination, and you can look, if for any of your listeners who want to go look, it's Appendix A to 10 CFR Part 810. You can Google it, and it provides you those lists of generally authorized destinations. Those are the only countries that you don't require approval from the Secretary of Energy to export nuclear technology that's controlled by Part 810 or provide assistance for a nuclear program abroad.
When an advanced reactor company comes to you and says, we're thinking about, and they're in their early stages, and we're thinking about designing this reactor of this type, beyond the regulatory approval, what are some of the other things that you advise them on when looking to export?
So there's a whole network. And so you look on for, if you have a set of recipients in mind, like I'm looking at these, I'm engaging in commercial discussions with these 5 countries. What do I need to be thinking about? First of all, is there a 123 agreement in place? Second of all, would we need authorization from the Secretary of Energy? Was this specifically authorized? That's what when you need authorization that the Secretary of Energy has to provide, that means it's specifically authorized. If it's generally authorized, it's through the regulations themselves that you have the authority. So you say, what bin does it fall into? And so if you need specific authorization, you have to figure out, can I get it? And so when you look at that, there's a political element to that as well, right? And so the government's going to take a look at the end destination and the end recipient. So it's going to be in China, for example, who in China is going to be receiving it? Because there's certain people in China that the Secretary of Energy will never authorize to receive certain technology. And so you have to be mindful, is there a underlying political consideration that I need to evaluate?
And does your technology overlap with what the certain political concerns might be?
Exactly. And so the other issue is there a nuclear regulator on the other end? If there's not, who's going to oversee and make sure your technology is used safely?
Wow.
And so a lot of countries that have no nuclear power programs don't have a nuclear power regulator because they don't need one. They may have a regulator that oversees medical isotopes or industrial commercial uses of radioactive materials, but it's not nuclear power. And so if they don't have one, or they used to have one, but they really haven't been used in a while, how are they getting up to speed? Have they actively engaged with the IAEA for assistance? Have they engaged with the international community to develop their nuclear power program? And that really needs to be developed in parallel with you developing your technology, because it takes years to get that established. So then, even when you have a nuclear regulator, who's your customer? Right. So you need an experienced nuclear operator, and you need a technically qualified entity who can operate your facility. Now, in some cases, you can import that. So if you can import a nuclear operator from the United States who's willing to go into a foreign country and operate your plant, that's great. Otherwise, you need to qualify your operators. You need to have people that have nuclear experience and that are capable of doing that. And so the final element is for countries that aren't used to nuclear, they need to understand what nuclear safety culture is. Right? So if a lot of countries, we can take for granted that how a company operates in the United States is how a company operates abroad. So if you have corporate governance provisions that say you have to act X, that's how it's implemented abroad. That may not necessarily be the culture of the end recipient. And so you particularly have to be sensitive to baking in the best practices of nuclear safety culture, a safety conscious work environment where the lowest level worker on the rung can go to the chief nuclear officer and raise a safety concern. You have to bake that in and give people time to understand what that means.
Right, and that last example that you mentioned is especially important post-Fukushima, because
Absolutely.
This is one of the things that they understood was one of the things that caused a safety issue. Was it was difficult in that particular culture to be able to stand up to your boss.
Absolutely, and that's not uncommon.
Yeah, I can imagine some of the countries that we're trying to export to.
Absolutely, and when you think about how our hierarchies are developed, or how tribes are aligned, or other political or socioeconomic alliances, that can significantly influence somebody's willingness to raise a concern, and that has to be addressed early on and worked on, not just among the lower levels. It has to be worked on from the board of directors, the entire line of executives, all the way through the organization, and it has to be constantly worked on.
So, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of complexity to it, but it seems like there's a lot of gating factors to get through. How do you advise some of these advanced technology companies to even begin to manage this with all these different factors at play?
We start with a matrix.
Yeah.
We start with a matrix. So we just talked about a lot of really complex things.
Yeah.
The bilateral agreements for nuclear cooperation, we can spend our entire time just discussing that one issue. So what I do is I create a matrix for clients, and they'll give me a list of countries that they're considering. I'll give them kind of like a bulleted overview of the things that we just talked about, and then a matrix that's separated. It's marked green for go. If it's generally authorized, it's a green box. If it's specifically authorized, it's a yellow box. If it's not going to happen, it's a red box. If there's no bilateral agreement for cooperation, it's a red box. If it's under negotiation, it's a yellow box. If it's already in place, it's a green box. And you can just are they a member of the Nuclear Suppliers Group? Is there a domestic nuclear liability law in place that aligns with international standards? Issues like that. If there's a domestic nuclear liability law in place that does not align with international standards, what we've seen is that nobody in the international community will go into that jurisdiction.
Wow, that's a good nugget.
Yeah.
So then, on top of all of this, after we've figured out the legal considerations, each one of these countries that are left might have different electricity markets as well, and so that might factor into the design also.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And do you advise on that too? Do you help your clients figure all that out?
If they needed me to, I would, but so far, the technical folks usually handle those issues, and it's not really a legal issue that I've had to address, but it's something I've been aware of, and it's been in discussions.
And definitely drives the design of the reactor itself.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we went over some of the complexity of these systems. Some of the feedback that I've gotten from the community as I speak to people on these issues is that a lot of these laws are outdated. Do you see the legal landscape changing at all, especially as you see even just in the last couple of weeks, the government is actively looking at how can we help support American companies export nuclear technology. Are things going to change on the legal front?
Well, so when you say are things going to change on the legal front, you have to think about where. Right off the bat, we're seeing pretty active administration support in supporting the U.S. commercial nuclear industry in competing abroad. And there's a lot of factors for that to happen. I think people have come to the realization in the United States that it actually poses a national security threat in the United States if we do not have an active presence abroad. And there's multiple reasons for that. One, if U.S. reactors aren't deployed abroad, then we lose our voice, a strong voice in the non-proliferation discussion.
Yes.
We have a great technology, we have a great safety standard, and when our technology isn't used abroad, there can be lesser safety standards and a less robust technology that's put in place. In the U.S., when we see kind of a decline in the commercial U.S. nuclear power industry, but then we're also seeing a decline in our presence abroad, then less people go to school to become nuclear engineers. And when less people go to school to become nuclear engineers, we lose our capabilities in that area as a whole. Yeah. And that's important not only for maintaining us as thought leaders in this area, but it's also important for maintaining our nuclear weapons program and ensuring that we have a robust supply of nuclear engineers to support our nuclear navy and our nuclear propulsion program, which has about 100 reactors on aircraft carriers and submarines.
Yeah.
So, sorry, to follow up on that, we're seeing a really active administration on that point to support. So what's going on?
Driven by security.
Driven large. There's an economic factor to that as well, but the large driver is the national security concerns that I've seen and in the discussions I've had. So the other factors to take into consideration is legally what's happening. All right, Part 810. Part 810 had not been revised in decades.
Right.
It just got an overhaul in like 2015.
Okay.
I don't see that being revisited. I think people realize that
now it is what it is.
It's not the fastest process. It is what it is. Unfortunately, it can take to receive specific authorizations to export certain types of technology to certain countries. You need government-to-government assurances, and it can take 2 years longer.
Yep.
I've had clients that have submitted specific authorization requests and just didn't get an answer.
Wow.
And so they eventually just took it back.
Yep.
They didn't get a formal answer, but they got a back channel answer of this isn't going to be granted. And so,
so it's just sitting
why don't you just, either it's just going to sit there or why don't you pull it back so it's not outstanding. And, you have to kind of factor that into your business decisions. That there can be a geopolitical issues that arise. And we saw that with Russia, after its invasion of Crimea, that specific authorizations were not being granted for Russia. And so if you had one pending, it was just going to sit there. And so, you have to kind of do that through trial and practice. The other laws, so the big one is the 123. So what we're seeing right now is a big political discussion about what the bilateral agreement for nuclear cooperation should look like. The 123 with the UAE contains what's called a gold standard provision.
The gold standard.
Right. It's the restriction on enrichment and reprocessing.
Right.
So this is actually interesting, not to be too academic here.
Please.
But when the nuclear non-proliferation treaties were negotiated, there was, and just even going back to Atoms for Peace in the 1950s, when the U.S. decided it was going to share its commercial nuclear technology with the world.
Yes.
It made a decision for very fundamental purpose that, I'm sure there's a lot of factors here, but one of the key factors was if we don't share this technology, Russia will.
Right.
And then we lose our voice in the ability to shape how it's used.
And are we almost seeing those same considerations come into play today?
Which is why I mentioned it.
Yes.
So now we're at the same junction where when we lose our voice, if you look at, I think Third Way has a nice pie chart that breaks down the nuclear power plants under construction around the world, and most of them are Russian.
They're exporting to Egypt, to Turkey, and these aren't places that we want them to have their political influence in and us not to have political influence
and that's exactly the trade-off. So we're looking at a bilateral agreement for nuclear cooperation right now with Saudi Arabia.
That's right. That's the big
topic. The big hot topic. In our agreement with the UAE, we had a provision in there that said no enrichment and reprocessing in the UAE, but if we let somebody else in the Middle East do it, we'll take yours out. And so the agreement that we're negotiating right now with Saudi Arabia, that we're hopefully negotiating or maybe negotiating, appears that is actively being negotiated, Saudi Arabia doesn't want that enrichment and reprocessing restriction in there.
They want the ability to enrich nuclear material.
So they want that ability. And the reason I mention that is not only is it important for what's going on with the UAE 123 agreement and just enrichment and reprocessing in general in the Middle East, but one of the things that is lost in that discussion when we talk about, we're just like, oh my God, Saudi Arabia wants to make nuclear weapons. That's what people hear.
Right.
One of the things to always keep in mind is when we the U.S. came out and we did the Atoms for Peace speech and we said we're going to share this technology with the world. There was an agreement that was made. If you forego developing nuclear weapons, we will share peaceful uses of nuclear technology.
Right. There's almost an inverse correlation between companies that have adopted nuclear energy and countries that have adopted nuclear weapons.
So The agreement very actively permitted the other countries to pursue peaceful uses of commercial nuclear power. That includes enrichment and reprocessing, and that was actively negotiated at the time between the countries that had kind of nuclear technologies and the countries that wanted it. Was the countries that didn't have it said, we want the ability to enrich and reprocess. And that storyline has developed over the years, but we're seeing a lot of pushback on when the U.S. tries to go to a country and say you can't enrich, you can't reprocess. We're seeing a lot of pushback. It doesn't necessarily mean that the country that's pushing back wants to pursue nuclear weapons. Underlying all that discussion is that agreement that was made when we brought commercial nuclear power abroad, that countries said, if we don't pursue a nuclear weapons program, we have a fundamental right, an inherent right to pursue enrichment and reprocessing. For one thing, it helps ensure security of their domestic energy supply. Because if you can't enrich, you can't fuel your own reactors. And one of the arguments, and everybody take this with a giant grain of salt, but one of the arguments Iran gave for pursuing its enrichment program was it used a research reactor to produce medical isotopes. It ran out of fuel for that research reactor. It came to the United States and said, will you give us fuel? And the United States said no. It went to the international community and said, will anybody give us fuel? And the international community said no. And so they said, fine, we're going to develop our own enrichment program. Take that with the biggest grain of salt you possibly can.
Right.
But that storyline...
Because as far as different technologies, energy supplies go, you can stockpile the longest amount of energy with nuclear than any other energy source. So it's one of your most secure energy sources. It's huge
amounts of energy, and you can go a huge amounts of time between refueling.
But what you're saying is it does provide them a political excuse almost to say we want to have enrichment capabilities.
And so... that's why the reason I'm telling this story is not to say, countries that won't agree to an enrichment and reprocessing standard clearly want to pursue nuclear weapons, or they don't want to pursue nuclear weapons. But there's more to that story than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, I hadn't actually heard that aspect of it before.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Now, earlier, tying this together, a lot of these export considerations are important when not only for the companies that decide to build these technologies, but also the people who want to invest in these technologies as well. And they need certain assurances that before they invest, especially at the earlier stages of capital risk, they need assurances that their investment will turn into something. Do you play a role in the investor due diligence aspect as well?
Absolutely. So interestingly enough, I kind of sit on both sides of the table here, depending on my client. So sometimes I represent, the advanced reactor technology who's going in and pitching an investor, and I address kind of I would say regulatory, but it's much broader than that. It's a lot of commercial aspects that are tied in with the nature of the technology. And but I also will be engaged by an investor to do the diligence in evaluating the risk associated with a project and the viability of a project.
And you've been involved with advanced reactors since 2006. How have you seen investors understand this technology, gauge this technology?
So I've seen a few things happen, including an involvement in who the investors I'm talking to are.
Okay.
So
where did it start?
So it started with a rich guy that was usually a technology person that's not scared of not having a normal rate of return for like a VC or private equity investment.
These are the Paul Allens, Bill Gates types?
Yeah, I did not talk to either of those two people, but those are the types of people. People who usually are in the technology field, have made a significant amount of money in that field, and are now looking to invest. So I saw that.
Invest or change the world. I mean, in some of these cases.
Yeah, and so I saw that it was either I want to invest, but a lot of times it was also combined with impact investing.
Right.
I want to invest in a technology that I think can raise the global standard of living.
And is that how some of these investor conversations, when you said evolved, have they started off with just some of the rich philanthropists and now have actual impact investing firms and institutions started looking at this as well?
Absolutely. So it started with kind of the technology guy with some money. Sometimes he formed a fund with some other tech guys with some money, and then they invested. Then we saw this move into and I didn't see it initially when I say impact investing, kind of the broader impact investment, the investment community that's looking at doing something about climate change or more broadly. And so I've been seeing that in the last few years where more and more people are emerging that are impact investors that are sometimes tech folks, sometimes not, that are starting to look into this area, either have already invested in this area or are looking at it. Wow. And I actually had a conversation, I would want to say it's a very hopeful conversation last week with an impact investment fund that never even thought about advanced nuclear, but they heard me speak at something and they're like, can you just give us can you just explain this technology to us, explain what its impact can be? And one of the easiest things for me to do was I sent them kind of some background material, but then I also sent them the link to Bill Gates' Breakthrough Energy Coalition.
Yeah.
Right? And so, because
it gives them a little bit of cover if there are other people investing in it, they can... It's that social effect.
Right? It also gives them the bona fides. So if somebody's at a fund and they're running it up or trying to pitch it to their clients that this is a good investment, when you can show them something like the Breakthrough Energy Coalition and the investments that they're making, it's kind of like, well, if Bill Gates is doing this, like, we're not completely off our rockers. There's some potential here. And the underlying, the reason the Breakthrough Energy Coalition came about was to invest in energy innovation that can be game-changing.
Right.
Not just how can we do something better, how can we do something more efficiently, not nibbling around the edges, just game-changing energy innovation.
And at this point, clean energy does need something game-changing. It's been interesting to watch the economics of renewables. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, yes, they've achieved cost parity. And you can build it up to, let's say, 20% of your grid in some areas and have it both reduce carbon and save money. But it hasn't been game-changing in terms of being economically compelling enough to shut down all fossil infrastructure across the world, which is, for climate purposes, essentially what we need.
Right.
And whether or not nuclear has achieved that yet, it does have that potential to be that game-changing.
Exactly. Yeah, and with renewables, you look at, it's not baseload power per se, so you have to look at combining it with storage, and some of these advanced reactor technologies are meant to provide that backup power for the renewables. And so it's not a us versus them. You need a diverse energy portfolio, and in order to have a meaningful impact on climate change, you're going to have to, there needs to be something big. Yes. And nuclear provides
a lot of power.
Nuclear has a capability to provide huge amounts of power.
Yep.
Right.
And then so that's some of the conversations that you have with these impact investors.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And how far do they take it? Do they bring you back for a second meeting where they're like, okay, now we want to get into some of the nitty gritty as well?
Yeah, so it actually varies, depending on the investor, or have they already specifically identified a project and are they in diligence? So they'll like roll up the sleeves, let's start doing some risk evaluation here. And so what I've seen is, we've kind of done the advisement for the technical person, the technical fund. We've done the advisement for the, impact investor. And what I'm starting to see now, which is surprising, is I've been doing diligence over the years for kind of private equity on mainstream nuclear, particularly for nuclear decommissioning. There's usually a large part of money in a decommissioning fund, trust fund that's set aside. They're like, can I go in and decommission this plant and then keep the corpus of the fund that's not used? And so we've had a lot of kind of questions.
There's some money at play there.
There's some money at play. But usually in those discussions, they're like, people will start asking me about what I know about advanced reactors. And
it's
I'm
an
like,
entree.
Right? And I'm like, this is exciting.
Yes.
I'm happy to talk about advanced reactors.
So as we wrap up this conversation, maybe you can help paint out what you believe. I mean, I always like to hear why people think nuclear is important, but also how you see the future of nuclear progressing over the next 5-10 years. You are on the pulse of everyone from the regulators to the advanced reactor companies, to the investors. So I'm excited to hear, what do you think about this?
So I'm really excited. It's a really fun area to work on. It's challenging from a legal perspective because I'm always putting on a strategic hat of, how can we get around this? Can we not get around this? How do we mitigate? How do we work with the investment community? How do we evaluate the risk? So, there's so many moving parts, and a lot of these companies are small, so I end up wearing multiple hats. I end up becoming,
chief advisor,
chief strategy officer. I end up becoming therapist. I end up becoming, and a lot of times it's just making introductions. We'll have one client that is doing something one way, and I'm like, well, we kind of have this mainstream nuclear client that does this too. You guys might want to talk. And there's a lot of symmetry there that can be taken advantage of, and a lot of partnerships we're seeing. So we're seeing kind of the light bridges teaming with the Framatones, formerly known as Arriva. We're seeing a lot of those type combinations where you have kind of the big guy and the little guy, the David and Goliath, teaming up for where there's symmetries. And so I think the more we see that teaming up, the more capital is coming into the smaller companies, the more progress we're seeing them. They can also tap into the connections of those bigger companies and their network, which is phenomenal. But I think we're going to see more and more. I'm seeing more of a discussion in the mainstream about advanced reactors. And the more we keep that discussion going, the more we have an administration that recognizes that we need to support this emerging market before we lose our leadership here. Right now, the United States is in a position we haven't been in a long time. We have dozens of advanced reactor technologies under development.
Right. They
can die on the vine, or we can provide support for them to ensure that they can come to commercialization and deployment. Not everybody's going to get there, but we need to at least create, from a government side of things, create an environment to help encourage that. And I see that starting to happen. I see that kind of cooperative feeling and thinking. And we're also seeing on the state level, states and local communities want to do something to address climate change. So when you look at kind of the customers for the customer for the first advanced reactors, the NuScale reactor, INL, and their first customer is UAMPS. And they're progressively making progress within their it's made up of 44 different entities. Right. So UAMPS is a collection of others, but when they have to go to their members, we're seeing I think
which almost makes it more impressive because
right?
They have to build support amongst a lot of people,
and they're making the sell to a lot of different entities,
yeah.
Right? And so we saw the the mayor of Idaho Falls come and speak.
Rebecca Casper.
Yeah, oh, there you go. So you're all over it. And she came and spoke, and she talked about how important this was from a climate change perspective, and how they wanted to do something. They wanted clean, reliable, energy, and that for them that was advanced reactors. So seeing the government support for this emerging community, seeing the local state support for clean technologies, combining that with increased investor interest in this area, and then technology developments and maturity within the advanced reactor community. I think we're seeing things all start to come together to make a lot of progress.
Amy Roma, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brett. Great talking to you.